The Zarnak Collective was the galaxy's most advanced military power. Their commanders were legendary strategists, their fleets unmatched, their technology capable of bending space and time. They had conquered 1,000 worlds, assimilated 100 species, and never once faced a challenge they could not overcome. Their leader, High Commander Vale, was a being of cold precision. He had never lost a battle. He had never even been tested. Then they detected the signal. It was faint, almost imperceptible, coming from a remote system on the galactic rim. A human signal. The humans were primitive, their technology laughable, their empire a scattering of colonies. The Collective's analysts dismissed it as a distress call from a lost vessel. But Vale was curious. He ordered a scout ship to investigate. The scout returned with puzzling data. The signal was not a distress call. It was a pattern, a mathematical sequence, repeating every 4.7 seconds. It meant nothing to the Collective's computers. But Vale felt something he had not felt in centuries. Unease. He ordered a full fleet to the system. 3,000 warships, the pride of the Zarnak Collective, converged on the signal's origin. They found a single human vessel, floating alone, unarmed, waiting. The commanders laughed. "They send one ship to greet us?" Vale did not laugh. He ordered the vessel scanned. The scan revealed nothing, no weapons, no shields, no life signs. The ship was empty, but the signal continued. Patient. Waiting. Vale ordered the empty vessel boarded. A squad of elite soldiers entered the ship. They found no crew, no logs, no technology. The ship was a shell. But the signal continued, pulsing from the ship's core. The soldiers reported back. Vale was puzzled. He ordered the ship's core extracted and brought to his flagship. The extraction was successful. The core was a simple crystal, glowing faintly, emitting the signal. The Collective scientists studied it. They found nothing unusual. It was just a crystal. But the signal continued. Vale ordered the signal analyzed. The analysis revealed something disturbing. The pattern was not random. It was a key to something. But what? Vale ordered a search of the system. They found nothing. No colonies, no bases, no life. Just the empty vessel and the glowing crystal. Vale made a decision. He would take the crystal back to the Collective's home world for further study. He ordered the fleet to prepare for departure. But before they could leave, the fleet's systems began to fail. Not one system. All of them. Engines, weapons, life support, communications, everything. The fleet was paralyzed. Vale demanded answers. His engineers had none. The signal continued. Patient. Waiting. Vale realized the truth. The crystal was not a key. It was a trap. And they had just triggered it. The Zarnak fleet was helpless. Drifting in the void, their systems dead, their commanders panicking. Vale tried to maintain order. He ordered manual overrides, backup systems, emergency protocols. Nothing worked. The signal had infected every system. It was not a weapon. It was a virus. A virus that had been waiting for them. The human vessel had been bait. The signal had been the lure. And they had taken it. Vale sent a message to the Collective's home world. The message was garbled, broken, barely understandable. "We are trapped. The humans have done something. We cannot move. We cannot fight. Send help." The message was received. The Collective's leaders were shocked. They sent a rescue fleet. The rescue fleet arrived in the system. They approached the paralyzed armada. Their systems began to fail. One by one, their ships went dark. The virus was contagious. It spread through the rescue fleet, through their communications, through their navigation. Soon, the rescue fleet was as helpless as the first. Vale watched from his flagship, his face pale. He had never been defeated. He had never even been challenged. Now he was a prisoner, trapped by a species he had dismissed as primitive. The signal continued. Patient. Waiting. Vale whispered to himself, "What do they want?" The signal did not answer. But Vale knew. They wanted him to understand. Days passed. The Zarnak fleets remained paralyzed. The signal continued, steady and unwavering. Vale's crew grew restless. Some whispered of mutiny. Others spoke of surrender. Vale refused to give up. He was a commander. He would find a way out. He ordered his engineers to study the virus. They worked around the clock. They found nothing. The virus was too advanced, too alien. It was human, but it was beyond human. It was something else. Something that had been waiting for the humans to find it. Vale demanded to speak to the humans. He sent a message on all frequencies. "I am High Commander Vale of the Zarnak Collective. I demand to speak with your leader." The reply came instantly. It was not a message. It was a feeling, a presence, a voice that spoke without words. You demanded nothing. You assumed you were superior. You were wrong. Sit. Wait. Learn. Vale was stunned. He had never encountered such arrogance. But he also felt something else. Curiosity. Who were these humans? What had they found? And why were they so patient? He decided to wait. He ordered his crew to stand down. They would not fight. They would not surrender. They would wait. And they would learn. Vale waited. Hours turned into days. Days into weeks. The signal continued, a constant presence. The Zarnak fleet remained paralyzed. The crew grew calmer, accepting their fate. Vale spent his time studying the signal, trying to understand its pattern. He began to see something he had missed. The signal was not random. It was a language of mathematics, of logic, of pure thought. It was the language of a species that had transcended words. He began to learn it. Slowly, painfully, he began to understand. The signal was not a weapon. It was a message from a civilization that had existed before the galaxy. A civilization that had almost destroyed itself. They had left behind a warning, a key, a gift. The humans had found it. They had understood it. They had used it to protect themselves. Vale was humbled. He had spent his life conquering. He had never once tried to understand. The humans had tried to understand. They had succeeded. He sent a message to the humans. Not a demand. A question. Who are you? The reply came instantly. We are the ones who listened. Vale asked to meet the humans. He was given coordinates. A small planet on the edge of the system. He took a shuttle, alone, unarmed. He landed on the planet. It was beautiful gardens, forests, rivers. He walked through the wilderness, following a path. He came to a clearing. A human woman was waiting for him. She was old, with gray hair and kind eyes. Her name was Alara. She did not speak. She simply sat down on a stone. Vale sat across from her. They sat in silence for a long time. Alara spoke first. You have been hunting our signal. You thought it was a weapon. It is not. It is a story. A story of a species that almost destroyed itself. They left it behind so that others would not make the same mistakes. Vale asked why the humans had used it as a trap. Alara smiled. Because you were hunting. You were not listening. We had to make you stop. We had to make you listen. Vale was silent. He had never been made to do anything. He had always been the one in control. Now he understood. The control was an illusion. The humans had shown him. Vale stayed on the planet for a week. He learned about the ancient civilization, the ones who had left the signal. They had been like the Zarnak, powerful, arrogant, certain of their superiority. They had almost destroyed themselves. In their final days, they had built the signal. A message to the future. A warning. A plea. They had hoped that someone would find it. Someone who would understand. Someone who would not make the same mistakes. The humans had found it. They had understood it. They had used it to change themselves. They had become listeners. Not conquerors. Not hunters. Listeners. Vale asked Alara what the ancient civilization had taught the humans. Alara smiled. They taught us that power is not the answer. Understanding is. They taught us that the greatest weapon is not a weapon. It is a story. A story that can change minds. A story that can heal. Vale was silent. He had never thought of stories as weapons. He had thought of weapons as weapons. He was beginning to understand. He was beginning to listen. And listening, he realized, was the first step toward change. Vale returned to his fleet. The paralysis had lifted. The systems were online. The signal had stopped. But Vale was different. He gave a new order. We are not going home. We are going to the human worlds. Not to conquer. To learn. The crew was stunned. They had never heard such an order. But they obeyed. Vale was their commander. They trusted him. The fleet traveled to the nearest human colony. They were greeted not with weapons, but with gardens. The humans welcomed them. They shared food, stories, music. They did not ask for anything in return. They simply offered. Vale walked through the colony, seeing the peace that the humans had built. He asked an elder why they had no defenses. The elder smiled. Because we have learned that the only thing worth defending is connection. And connection cannot be defended. It can only be nurtured. Vale nodded. He understood. The humans had not defeated him with weapons. They had defeated him with presence. With patience. With a story. And the story, he realized, was just beginning. He would carry it with him. He would share it with his people. He would become a listener. A student. A friend. Vale's transformation spread. The Zarnak Collective, once the galaxy's greatest military power, began to change. They dismantled their weapons, repurposed their fleets, and built schools, hospitals, and gardens. The galaxy watched in amazement. The greatest conquerors in history had become peacemakers. Not because they were defeated, because they had been taught. The human signal, once a trap, became a gift. Other species sought it out, hoping to learn its lesson. They found not a weapon, but a story. A story of a species that had almost destroyed itself. A story of a species that had listened. A young Veth scholar named Thessa studied the signal's origin. She discovered that the ancient civilization had not been alone. They had left behind a network of signals scattered across the galaxy. Each signal carried a piece of their history, their wisdom, their warning. The humans had found one. They had understood it. They had used it to protect themselves. But there were others. Others that held even more wisdom. Others that could teach the galaxy how to heal. Thessa published her findings. The galaxy was intrigued. A new era of discovery began. Not of conquest, of understanding. The search for the ancient signals became a galactic project. Ships from 1,000 species traveled to every corner of the galaxy, hunting for the hidden messages. They found dozens of signals, each one a piece of a larger puzzle. The ancient civilization had been vast, wise, and ultimately tragic. They had seen the future. They had tried to prevent it. They had failed. But they had left behind their wisdom. The humans, who had found the first signal, became the guides. They had learned to listen. They taught others to listen. They showed the galaxy that the signals were not weapons. They were teachers. A young KRYLL explorer named Kale found a signal in a nebula. He spent months deciphering it. It was a history of the ancient civilization's fall. A story of arrogance, of war, of near extinction. Kale wept when he finished. He saw his own species in the story. He saw the Zarnak, the Veth, the humans. He saw everyone. The story was universal. He shared his discovery. The galaxy wept with him. They saw themselves in the ancient civilization. They resolved to change. They would not make the same mistakes. They would listen. The ancient signals taught the galaxy many things. They taught that power was not the answer. They taught that understanding was. They taught that the greatest weapon was a story. And they taught that the greatest story was the one that could heal. A young human child, born on a colony world, asked her mother why the signals were so important. Her mother, who had studied them, smiled. Because they tell us the truth. The truth that we are not alone. The truth that we have made mistakes. The truth that we can change. The signals remind us of who we are and who we could become. The child asked if the ancient civilization had been happy. Her mother thought for a moment. I do not know, but I think they were hopeful. They built the signals so that someone would find them, so that someone would learn, so that someone would not make the same mistakes. That is hope. That is love. The child nodded. She did not fully understand, but she would. She would grow up in a galaxy that had learned to listen, a galaxy that had learned to change, a galaxy that had learned that the greatest gift was not power. It was a story, and she would carry that story with her always. The signals continued to teach. Each new discovery added a layer to the galaxy's understanding. The ancient civilization had been like them, flawed, fearful, hopeful. They had almost destroyed themselves. They had left behind a warning. They had also left behind a gift. The gift of choice. The choice to change. The choice to listen. The choice to heal. The galaxy, once divided by war, became united by story. They shared the signals, discussed their meanings, and debated their lessons. They grew closer. Not because they agreed. Because they listened. A young Veth poet visited the signal that Kale had found. She sat in the nebula, feeling its presence. She wrote a verse that became famous. In the signal, I heard a voice, / not of command, but of wisdom. / it said, you are not alone. / you have never been alone. / the story is the bridge. The verse was carved into stones across the galaxy. It was a reminder that the signals were not just history. They were bridges. Bridges between the past and the future. Between the dead and the living. Between all of them. The galaxy, which had once been defined by hunting, was now defined by bridges. And bridges, the humans had taught them, were stronger than walls. Generations passed. The ancient signals became the foundation of galactic civilization. They were taught in schools, discussed in councils, and revered in homes. The galaxy, once divided by war, was now united by wisdom. The humans, who had found the first signal, were now quiet elders. They did not lead. They did not dictate. They simply listened. and their listening had taught the galaxy to listen. A young human historian named Sora wrote a book titled The Signal and the Bridge. She traced the evolution of the galaxy from hunters to listeners. She argued that the ancient civilization had not saved them. They had shown them that they could save themselves. The signals were not answers, she wrote. They were questions. Questions that forced us to look at ourselves. Questions that challenged us to change. The galaxy did not change because of the signals. It changed because it chose to answer the questions. The book became a classic. Its final line was quoted everywhere. The bridge is not built by the signals. It is built by those who choose to cross. The bridge metaphor spread. Other species, inspired by Sora's book, built their own bridges. Not physical bridges. Metaphorical bridges. Bridges between cultures, between worlds, between hearts. The galaxy, once divided by fear, was now connected by choice. A young KRYLL engineer, named Kale, built a physical bridge. A massive structure connecting two worlds that had once been enemies. It was not a bridge of steel. It was a bridge of light, a beam that carried signals, stories, and presence. The two worlds, which had once fought wars, now shared gardens. Kale was asked why he had built the bridge. He smiled. Because I heard the signals. I heard the stories. I heard the call to connect. The bridge is my answer. The bridge became a symbol. Others built their own bridges. The galaxy, once a collection of isolated worlds, became a network of connection. Not forced connection. Chosen connection. The signals had taught them that connection was not a threat. It was a gift. And gifts, freely given, were the hardest to refuse. The galaxy, which had once scoffed at humanity's lone vessel, now celebrated it. It had been the first bridge. The first signal. The first step toward understanding. The bridges grew. They spanned not just worlds, but systems, sectors, and eventually galaxies. The ancient signals, once scattered, were now connected through the bridge network. The galaxy's story became one story. A story of listening. A story of learning. A story of healing. A young Veth child asked her mother why the bridges were so important. Her mother, a bridge builder, smiled. Because they remind us that we are not separate. We are part of a larger story. A story that began before us and will continue after us. The bridges connect us to that story. They remind us that we are part of something bigger. The child asked if the bridges would ever break. Her mother shook her head. Not as long as we choose to cross them. Bridges do not break because they are weak. They break because we stop crossing. As long as we keep crossing, they will hold. The child nodded. She understood. The bridges were not just structures. They were relationships. And relationships, like bridges, required maintenance. They required presence. They required choice. She would grow up crossing bridges. She would learn to maintain them. She would become a bridge herself. The bridge network expanded across the universe. New species, newly contacted, were offered bridges. Some accepted. Others resisted. The bridges did not force. They offered. They offered connection, presence, story. A young being from a distant galaxy visited the bridge network. She had heard the stories of the humans, the signals, the bridges. She wanted to see for herself. She crossed a bridge. She felt the presence of countless beings, past and present. She wept. She had spent her life searching for meaning. The bridge had given her something better. Connection. She stayed on the bridge for a year, learning to listen, learning to be present. When she left, she was not the same. She had learned that meaning was not found. It was built. Built through bridges. Built through presence. Built through choice. She returned to her galaxy and built a bridge. A small one, between two worlds that had been enemies. It grew. It connected. It healed. The bridge network continued to spread. The galaxy, once defined by hunting, was now defined by bridges. And bridges, the humans had taught them, were the only walls worth building, walls that did not divide but connected. Walls that were really doors. Thousands of years passed. The bridge network had become the galaxy's nervous system. Signals, stories, and presence flowed through it, connecting every world, every species, every heart. The ancient signals, once scattered, were now part of the bridge's foundation. They were remembered, honored, and taught. The humans, who had found the first signal, were now part of the bridge's history. They were the ones who had shown the galaxy that the greatest weapon was a story. A young human historian named Sora wrote a book titled The Bridge of Signals. She traced the evolution of the galaxy from hunters to listeners to bridge builders. She concluded that the bridges were not the answer. They were the question. What are you willing to cross? The galaxy's answer had changed. Not because of the bridges. Because of themselves. Sora's book became a classic. Its final line was quoted everywhere. The bridge is not the destination. It is the choice to cross. And that choice, made again and again, is what builds a galaxy. The question spread. What are you willing to cross? Beings across the universe asked themselves. They asked each other. They asked the bridges. The answers were not always comfortable. But they were honest. And honesty, the bridges had taught them, was the only foundation for connection. A young KRYLL asked his elder why the question was so important. The elder, who had crossed many bridges, smiled. Because it shows us what we truly value. Not what we say we value. What we truly value. When we know what we are willing to cross, we can cross it. Not with fear. With presence. The young KRYLL asked if he could cross a bridge. The elder nodded. When you are ready. When you are ready to answer the question. When you are ready to be present. The young KRYLL was silent. He was not ready. But he wanted to be. He began to practice. He sat in silence for a few minutes each day. He asked himself the question. He listened to the answer. He was not always comfortable. But he was honest. And honesty, he learned, was the beginning of crossing. He would cross a bridge one day. He would feel the presence. He would be changed. He was ready. The young KRYLL crossed his first bridge. It was a small one, between two worlds that had once been enemies. He walked slowly, feeling the presence of countless beings who had crossed before him. He felt their stories, their hopes, their fears. He felt the bridge holding them all. He reached the other side. He was not the same. He had learned that crossing was not about arriving. It was about the journey, the presence, the choice. He returned to his world and built a garden. A small one near the bridge. He planted seeds from both worlds, creating a space where beings could meet. Not as enemies, as travelers. The garden grew. The bridge became a symbol. Others came to cross. They came to plant seeds. They came to build gardens. The galaxy, once divided by fear, was now connected by gardens. And gardens, the humans had taught them, were the only bridges worth crossing. They were alive. They grew. They healed. The young KRYLL became a gardener. He tended the garden, the bridge, the connection. He was not a conqueror. He was a crosser, a listener, a healer. And that, he learned, was enough. The gardens grew. Every bridge had a garden. Every garden had a bridge. The galaxy became a network of living connections. Not of steel and light, but of soil and seed. The ancient signals, once the foundation, were now part of the soil. Their wisdom had been absorbed. Their warnings had been heeded. Their gift had been accepted. A young human child, born in a garden, asked her grandmother why the gardens were so important. Her grandmother, who had crossed many bridges, smiled. Because they remind us that we are not separate. We are part of a larger garden. A garden of species, of worlds, of stories. The gardens connect us to that garden. They remind us that we are part of something bigger. The child asked if the gardens would ever die. Her grandmother shook her head. Not as long as we tend them. Gardens do not die because they are weak. They die because we stop tending them. As long as we keep tending, they will grow. The child nodded. She understood. The gardens were not just places. They were practices. Practices of presence, of connection, of healing. She would grow up tending gardens. She would learn to tend them. She would become a gardener herself. She would keep the garden alive. She would keep the connection growing. She would be part of the garden. And so the story continues, not as a legend, but as a living garden. The bridges stand, connecting worlds. The gardens bloom, connecting hearts. The signals whisper, connecting minds. The galaxy, once defined by hunting, is now defined by connection. A child is born on a world that was once a battlefield. She grows up in the shadow of a bridge and a garden. She learns that her ancestors hunted because they were afraid. She learns that her ancestors stopped hunting because they were brave. She learns that she is part of the bridge, part of the garden, part of the connection. On her 10th birthday, she crosses her first bridge. She walks slowly, feeling the presence of countless beings who have crossed before her. She reaches the other side. She is not the same. She has learned that crossing is not about arriving. It is about the journey, the presence, the choice. She plants a seed in the garden on the other side. A small one in a small plot. She waters it daily. She watches it grow. She learns that connection is not built in a day. It is built in moments. And moments, she knows, are enough. The child grows up to become a gardener and a bridge keeper, like so many before her. She tends the gardens, maintains the bridges, and helps others cross. She does not seek fame or power. She seeks connection. She learns that the signals were not the enemy, the fear that ignored them was. She learns that the bridges were not the answer, the presence they enabled was. She spends her life sharing this lesson. Not through lectures, through presence. She sits with the fearful, the angry, the lost. She does not offer advice. She offers silence. She offers space. She offers a bridge. Are you ready to cross? A young Veth asks her why she asks the question. She smiles. Because crossing is a choice. A choice to be present. A choice to be connected. A choice to heal. The question helps them choose. The Veth asks if she ever gets tired. She laughs. Yes. Every day. But tired is not the same as done. And I am not done yet. She continues her work. She tends another garden. She maintains another bridge. She asks another question. The galaxy heals. Not perfectly. Not permanently. But enough. And enough, she knows, is all anyone needs. The gardener's life is long. She sees generations pass. She sees the gardens grow. She sees the bridges span further. She sees the galaxy slowly become more connected. She does not take credit. She gives it to the seeds, to the soil, to the bridges that connected. On her deathbed, she asks for one thing. Her family, gathered around her, asks what she needs. She whispers, plant a seed. Anywhere. For me. They do. They plant a seed from the garden of bridges in a small garden outside her window. It grows into a sapling. It grows into a tree. It grows into a bridge. The gardener dies peacefully, her hand resting on the soil. The tree's branches reach toward the nearest bridge. The garden holds her. She is not gone. She is in the roots, in the branches, in the bridges that will grow from her tree. She is part of the cycle, part of the garden, part of the galaxy that she helped to connect. And that, she had always known, was enough. Not victory, not conquest. A seed planted with love. A life lived with presence. A voice heard once. And that voice, echoing through the ages, would never truly die. It would grow. It would bloom. It would become a bridge, not of separation, of connection. And so the story ends, or does not end, because stories, like seeds, do not truly end. They grow. They branch. They scatter. The hunt, once a way of life, is now a memory. The signals, once traps, are now teachers. The bridges, once small, are now vast. The galaxy, once defined by hunting, is now defined by connection. Not by force, by choice. A child is born on a distant world, unaware of the hunt, the signals, the bridges. But she will learn. She will hear the story. She will feel the presence. She will cross a bridge. She will plant a seed. She will tell a story. She will become part of the cycle. The cycle that began with a single signal. The cycle that continued with a single question. What are you willing to cross? The cycle that will never end, because beings will always hunt, and beings will always learn to cross. The humans, who found the first signal, are now part of its rhythm. They are the gardeners, the keepers, the quiet voices in the silence. They have taught the universe that hunting is not the answer. Connection is. And the universe finally has learned. Not perfectly, not permanently, but enough. Enough to keep crossing. Enough to keep connecting. Enough to keep planting seeds. The seeds are planted. The bridges are crossing. The universe is connecting. And somewhere, in the heart of a garden, a flower blooms. It has no hunters. It needs no hunters. It is simply itself. And that, the humans have taught, is the greatest lesson of all.